Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Stellar Open Protocol discussion. In these meetings, as always, we discuss core advancement proposals, CAPs, which are technical specs that suggest changes to the Stellar protocol, and they're necessary to allow that protocol to continue to evolve to meet ecosystem needs. We live stream the meetings so that you can follow along. I do want to note it's a technical discussion, so if you're watching, please take a look at the CAP linked to in the show description, CAP 21. We do keep an eye on the discussion box, and your comments there inform future decisions. But our goal today is to talk through some final questions about CAP 21, so we'll only really address questions here if they're directly related to that goal. Once again, this meeting is part of a CAP's lifecycle. They are started on the Stellar Dev mailing list, and there's a link to that mailing list for anyone who wants to participate in future discussions. They're drafted and iterated on before they're drafted, or before they end up in this discussion, in this meeting. And based on what happens in this meeting, they may get put up for a vote before the CAP committee, who decides whether or not to accept or reject a CAP. After a vote, the CAP enters a 1-week final comment period, so everyone has a last chance to raise questions on that same mailing list. If a CAP makes it through final comment period, it's implemented in a major release of Stellar Core, which is then put forward for network validators to vote on. Ultimately, at the end of the process, it is the network that decides on whether to accept major protocol changes. On that note, there is currently a validator vote to upgrade the network to protocol 18 scheduled for November 3rd. That's next week. And so that upgrade would introduce automated market maker functionality to Stellar. So it's very exciting. It also introduces some breaking changes. So if you build on Stellar, please make sure to install up-to-date versions of any Stellar SDKs you use, any Stellar SDKs, along with Stellar Core and Horizon if you run a node. But today we're discussing a different CAP destined potentially for a different protocol, CAP 21. CAP 21 lays the groundwork for building payment channels on Stellar. Payment channels allow multiple parties to transact off-chain and periodically settle on-chain. And among other things, what they do is they make it a lot easier to build high-volume use cases on Stellar. So CAP 21, it makes technical changes geared towards enabling payment channels. Payment channels are great for scaling network throughput. And that's kind of my overview. Where we are with CAP 21, we've discussed it a few times. Revisions were, David made revisions recently based on the last discussion that we have. And so I think where we're at now is like, are there any questions, lingering issues, anything that we can go over with CAP 21, especially anything that's preventing it from being put forward to the CAP committee for approval? So, anyone got anything?
I'm happy to summarize the changes.
Awesome, perfect.
Pretty minor. So there was this thing where like we said that time points should be signed because like databases were like it's more convenient in some databases to have signed 64-bit numbers, but like then we decided actually that was a bad idea. So it's mostly like kind of orthogonal to this proposal. It's just like since we were making use of time points and durations and stuff, so that's reverted to unsigned. Well, I'll go over the small changes. Then people wanted a note about like the bump sequence, how like that can like invalidate a transaction in the same block. The main change is that basically when you see two transactions that are incompatible, they can't both be in the same block because like let's say one has sequence number 12 and a min seq ledger gap of 2, and the other has like sequence number 11. Previously I can't remember what I said. You took the one with like the highest or lowest sequence number or something. Now you just take the first one that you saw. And the reason I didn't do that in the first place is because I was worried about, well, now you're going to see a block and you're going to end up having to like fetch transactions that you don't have. It turns out you'll have to do that. You have to do that anyway, because this kind of stuff can come out in other contexts. Like if you have two transactions that have the same sequence number and the same fee, then and they're flooded at the same time to different nodes. Well, yeah, like half the nodes might see one and half might see another. And so we're just doing the same thing. You keep whichever you saw first and you discard anything you receive later that can't exist in the same block as the first one you received. That's
Is
pretty
that
much
what
it.
David, is that what we discussed before? Because I thought that was actually taking the lowest. I mean, because I thought this was a potential way to artificially like delay forever. Like if you have
That's right. You don't take the lowest.
pre-signed
You take the
transactions,
first
right?
one you see.
Like a typical of first one you see. You're right, but like a bad you know, a bad actor can always submit the a lower one, right? So maybe it's annoying.
It doesn't matter. You just take the first one you see. So if something's been flooded and the bad actor floods something incompatible, the validators won't accept that, or they won't forward it. They would just.
Well, it's more like you have to be first to submit your transaction, right? Which is kind of annoying from a security standpoint. Like if I have like I think we discussed that. I'm not exactly sure if it was relevant to the protocol that is described in the CAP. Yeah, because you have like some protocols, you have like, you know, many sequence numbers, and then the reason you have this gap is it allows you to kind of jump forward.
Right.
So I can basically like delay that transaction in an arbitrary fashion if I have access to those pre-signed transactions. I don't remember actually. I would need to go back to the protocol that is described in the CAP. I think maybe it doesn't matter in this situation. Can people remember?
I remember the problem with the old one was that yeah, you could keep submitting something that would like you know, bump the age or whatever, and so now it doesn't matter. It's just like whichever one you there's nothing. I mean, I guess there's potentially like a continued race, but there's nothing. But there's nothing that like inherently guarantees that the attacker can win the race.
The disclosure, yeah, like I'm looking at the protocol that described in the CAP. So like the disclosure transaction, is it using the minsec, like those ranges or not?
The disclosure,
yeah, so basically
the declaration uses minseq num,
you can,
and then the second one uses minseq age.
So it's only the minsec age that would be affected, and I think we don't care in this context because it depends directly from the disclosure is not impacted by this flood first type of thing, right? Because it doesn't have that min age condition.
Exactly.
Okay, so then I think, yeah, like now I remember, like it's for this particular protocol, it's fine to take an arbitrary one. Yeah. So
I mean, it doesn't really come up in this protocol because all of the disclosure transactions are compatible. Like they could all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That you could all run them all in the same block.
Yeah.
So does that mean that the way that things are written right now in CAP 21, the question of this take the first one you see approach seems to work for people? Cool. Great.
Yeah, it's also simpler to implement. Yeah, I think we actually discussed some of that last time, which was a while ago now.
But it's not perfect in a way that like already other situations aren't perfect, like two transactions with the same sequence number and fee. So it doesn't make things worse.
When you say the first that you see, that means that it is submitted first in real time.
Yes, but of course, of course, before consensus, different validators will see things in different order.
Right.
Depending on how it propagates through the network. So, but I think we already accept the fact that you may need to kind of refetch the block, while it's being nominated. So.
David, are there other changes that we should walk through?
That's it.
Wow. John?
I didn't have any issues when I
I mean,
reviewed it.
there's some typos and stuff, but I don't know if they're worth going through.
Lee, I remember that you were doing some experiments on the kind of performance you can get out of this. And I remember you were considering different kinds of cases and different like structures of payment channels that you could do, like synchronous and asynchronous and all these other kinds of things. Do you want to give us like some context on what the kind of outcome of all of that was, what the limitations are of this proposal in the land of what you kind of were experimenting on? I don't know, because it's very clear to me that this produces payment channels and they work. But it's not like, having not done any of the experiments myself, it's not clear to me what's the limitation, like what's the best payment channel you can build here in terms of throughput, in terms of all these other things.
Yeah, in terms of yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. So we've been doing experiments to validate, does this produce a payment channel that's safe? Can you build a payment channel with this that's predictable, that interacts with things like issued assets well, interacts with things like regulated assets, and yeah, like what sort of performance can you get out of it? I think the performance thing is something that we're still experimenting with. So and it's still something that we're figuring that out. And in terms of everything else, what we've seen, we have discovered. Sorry, somebody's saying my mic is. Is this better? Is it okay? Yeah. So what we're seeing is that it works really well with issued assets, and we've written up a thorough sort of description about how you would implement this so that it's safe, with trust lines and can be predictable with trust lines. And we have ideas as well for how this would work with regulated assets, things like the assets that use ecosystem standards like SEP8. And it looks like it fits those use cases well as well. So I think the experimentation we've done to validate, does CAP21 enable payment channels sufficiently? Then I think the answer is yes, it does. In terms of like, what problems we haven't solved yet, like you mentioned, asynchronous payment channels, and with CAP40 that we've discussed previously that we want to is sort of being batched together with CAP21. We can do, single message payment channels, which is really, I think, interesting. So I can send you a message, and that's all that we have to do for you to receive everything you need to execute that payment. There doesn't actually have to be any further communication. But I think what we haven't figured out everything, for how to implement that type of thing. So I think there is still more experimentation to be done to figure out other those sort of things. But
with those experiments, does it make sense to wait to accept a cap like this until pending the results of those experiments, because they might affect the cap itself, or not?
Is that question directed at me, or?
I think so. Basically, it sounds like there are more experiments that you want to do to sort of verify or to find out certain things about the way that these payment channels that are enabled by CAP 21 and CAP 40 would perform, correct?
So, I mean, I think we could experiment with this forever.
Yeah.
And there's always aspects of this that we can improve. I think what we've proven so far, and what we've coupled with CAP 40 into CAP 21, is at a point where, like, I don't think we need to do more experimentation with it to try actually using it in use cases. So, yeah, I don't think this needs to be blocked on more experimentation.
Great.
Yeah, like I think, like at this point, we're probably not going to be blocked on the actual cap itself, like in terms of from a technical standpoint, I think it makes sense. I think it's more like, do we have like we're talking about use cases in the abstract, and so it's more of a question of more like prioritization, and is that like, do we want to accept this now? Because typically what we want to do is that we don't want to accept a cap that is going to linger for a year or whatever. So it's like, I think what I would like to see is either like, and that's appealing to the ecosystem, like people coming forward, if they are really interested in this, or we're going to have to find somebody, identify ourselves, somebody in the ecosystem. So that would be my, and that I think is going to be kind of the next step for this one.
I mean, I think in terms of timing, like it's you need to kind of accept the cap sometimes in order to attract the users, right? And if you look at, like obviously we've had things like multiplexed accounts where, it's been a long road, but it seems like there's like valid use cases, and so people are going to be quite happy to have it in the long run. I think it's definitely the same thing in this, because it like fundamentally adds new capabilities that people haven't been thinking of. Things like, in addition to payment channels, right? This also allows like new forms of account recovery and things like that. But the thing that's the thing about this cap is that it could be that we need it in like a big hurry, right? Like it could be that it turns out some new use case comes along that is like super popular and requires like fairly high transaction throughput, and so once something is in core, then it's like, people can update their applications to work on it much faster. But the cycle is such that, if some amazing use case came along and then had kind of explosive growth that required payment channels, that project would basically die if it had to wait for it to like go through the Stellar Core release process. So I think we should get a version of this deployed into core where people can build on it. And if we have to revise it, it's a union, right? We can have a subsequent version of this, but it's better to have something out there. The things that you have to do to compensate for not having this range from it's impossible, like the account recovery stuff is like it's basically like almost impossible, to like you need like a huge number of like just extra accounts to each have their own sequence number and stuff, and it's just like a major thing.
So I have a question, Nico, which is, how do you estimate the cost of implementing this? Because obviously there's tension here between, we want to see that there's ecosystem use cases, but like David says, if like a monster use case shows up and the network is not ready in time, like is there an opportunity cost here?
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, it's like everything else. Like, I think we'll have to go. Like, I think most likely from what it looks like, the changes that are going to be the more complicated things as part of that cap are probably going to be around the overlay type of changes. That's what it looks like to me.
But the latest change should make it simpler, right?
Well, you still have to do it in a safe and efficient way and blah, blah. I mean, that's what it looks like, especially because we have the prototype that Lee put together for the actual implementation. So there's this one part. I think the other part was around, I think, the question mark on testing, like the test infrastructure that we have, which is kind of broken in this context. I'm not sure exactly how much work this is going to be. I mean, like, to answer the Thomas question, I mean, it's not the cheapest cap we've done. I would probably put it as like a medium in terms of like complexity. Whatever that means. So like if we were starting to, let's say, work on this like in Q1 next year, it would probably be done in Q1. I don't know the implications on like the SDKs and so on, though. Like that I can't speak to. but it looks like they're basically not, like there is not a whole lot going on there. It's very similar to the change we did for when we like the, I think like the, when we changed the envelope before without the actual. It's a little easier. Yeah, it's like a little easier because there's no max account, which was the big, mess. It's still like, yeah, like all the SDKs have to upgrade type of situation.
Yeah, I can talk about the SDKs a little bit because I prototyped making them change to core, Horizon, and then the SDKs, and I obviously took shortcuts around testing. But the SDK part was very, very straightforward actually. So I think there'll be very little. It'll be a lot easier than when we introduced the envelope. A lot easier than when we introduced must accounts. And I think even the core changes were relatively straightforward in terms of when you just focus on the functionality. But then it definitely got a bit fuzzy when trying to figure out how to test this in the existing tests. And I'm not that familiar with the Stellar Core code base, so it was definitely challenging. So I think that's probably right too. And then I think in Horizon, the Horizon has this transaction queue where you submit transactions, they go into a transaction queue, they get ordered by sequence number, and then get submitted when that sequence number is ready to be processed. So it allows people who in the ecosystem who are using Horizon to submit transactions in any order, and Horizon just sort of smooths that experience over for them. And I think there is some, a little bit of work to do there to make that work with min sequence numbers. But other than that, the rest of the Horizon changes were pretty straightforward as well. Something that I want to mention too is, so Nico was like appealing to the ecosystem, like, we want to find out what use cases people have for this. We've got Meridian coming up in soon, and we are going to be talking about Cap 21, Cap 40 payment channels, how it actually works there. And we will talk about, the performance. We should have the performance experiments done by then as well. So if that's something that's probably like worth watching.
So it seems like where that leaves us is technically this cap feels sound. There are further experiments that are happening to test performance issues. There's a question of whether or not we should prioritize implementation of it that we can try to figure out offline. And we would love to hear from people in the ecosystem about any use cases, because that would definitely help identify this as a priority, although it's not necessary that we hear that, but we'd love to hear from anyone who might want to use this. And finally, there will be more info on this at Meridian, which is a good time to learn more out there and also possibly come to us with some idea of how you might use this. Does that all sound correct?
Yeah, but it's also like, this isn't also an insurance policy, right? You don't go around like asking people like, what are your use cases for insurance or whatever, right? Like, so
No, I understand. I don't think it's necessary, right? I don't think that it has to be the sole criteria to make us decide how to prioritize this. But if someone is like, I know what I need this for, and they told us, that would be helpful, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's a good reason to delay accepting it today.
Yeah, I mean, just like procedurally,
you're always going to get more data. You're always going to get more information by delaying until it's too late.
Yeah. I mean, I think procedurally, there's one person, Jed couldn't make it today, and so I think that actual acceptance would have to happen asynchronously offline. And so for me, I think the takeaway is that we should put it in front of the CAP committee and see what you guys think about accepting. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't know. Any objections to that
Yeah.
plan?
And cap 40 as well. Because
Yeah. And so I guess
the only objection to cap 40 was that cap 21 hadn't been accepted yet. So
that's correct.
People should go on record now as having any suggestions for cap 40, or we should move forward with that one as well.
No, it should move with at the same time.
Okay, cool. Well, then I think the follow-up action is to basically put both of those and say, hey, CAP committee, take a look and see if they get approved, which we can do asynchronously. Is there anything else? Are we done for the day? I take that silence as awesome. Well, once again, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks so much for everyone watching. And again, please make sure that you prepare for the Protocol 18 upgrade. The vote is on Wednesday, November 3rd. So install up-to-date software before then. And yeah, if you have anything exciting to say about payment channels, make sure to join the discussion or check in with us, because we would love to know about use cases that this would enable. And we will see you next time and at Meridian. Thanks, everybody.